Welcome to the Chopin channel. I'm Roberto Poli. A Facebook post by a pianist friend prompted some reflections on the editorial choices that we encounter in modern editions, particularly in Chopin. My friend asked what the staccato markings for the bass notes in measures 106 and 108 of the Ballade in G minor, opus 23, could possibly mean, and offered his interpretation. The idea was that both measures present dominant chords that resolve to their respective tonics, and the staccato requires a particular gesture which makes the hand leap, creating an intense resonance together with the pedal. We often see this kind of notation in Chopin's music, and it's not unusual to hear pianists muse about such staccatos as carrying a specific timbral meaning, a particular way of attacking the key to produce a resonant ringing effect, for example, or a richer tone, or to sonically isolate a bass note from the rest of a left-hand accompaniment. I can't argue with those interpretations, of course. Each of us has our own sensibilities when it comes to creating a satisfying sonic result. As far as I'm concerned, I believe these staccato markings simply serve to indicate that the bass notes must be shortened, not merely short, but detached, to facilitate a quick move to a different register of the keyboard. This may sound simplistic, but we have to keep in mind that this music was published at a time when it was primarily being consumed by amateur pianists. Alongside expressive markings, amateurs often needed basic technical guidance. The kind of left-hand writing where the bass relies heavily on the pedal because other material is played while that bass note is sustained was relatively new at the time. So the staccato could function as a kind of technical hint, a practical instruction in the form of a visual reminder that the bass note should be physically shortened in order to achieve a smoother transition to the tenor register. A useful comparison can be found in the left hand of the Nocturne in E-flat major, opus 9, number 2. Here, the distance between the bass note and the following chord group naturally prompts the performer to shorten the bass. The staccato marking doesn't mean short, but shortened, separated. Meanwhile, the two chords that follow are slurred, an indication that they form one physical group, often organized in octave position. Now, back to the Ballade. According to the edition that my friend was using, staccatos appear only in measures 106 and 108 within a long passage where the left hand consistently features a bass octave followed by a group of chords in the tenor register. But in fact, only measure 106 contains the marking in the three first editions, which were all published in 1836. Where then did the edition my friend was using find the staccato in measure 108? The marking appears in the only surviving autograph manuscript which Chopin prepared for the French publisher Maurice Schlesinger in Paris. However, this staccato failed to appear in the three first editions altogether. Chopin published in three countries simultaneously: for Schlesinger in Paris, France, between 1833 and the mid-1840s, for Wessel in London, England, and for Breitkopf und Härtel in Leipzig, Germany, with alternative German firms, generally in Berlin, early on or when an agreement with Breitkopf could not be reached. The publication of a piece occurred in all three locations at the same time in order to avoid piracy. Misprints were common in the 1830s, and slight inconsistencies between autograph manuscripts prepared by a composer for the purpose of publication and the engraved editions that followed were not unusual. In order to understand what happened in regard to the staccato in measure 108 of the Ballade, we need to understand the genesis of the sources. We know that Chopin prepared a manuscript for Schlesinger, but the other publishers, Breitkopf in Leipzig and Wessel in London, would have needed manuscripts for the Ballade too, or at least a point of reference on which to base their own editions. Comparative analysis of the first three editions shows that the German and English editions were based on the proof sheets from the French edition, meaning only one manuscript was prepared, and the engraved version from this manuscript was then sent to Leipzig and London. This is a rather unusual circumstance because the remarkable differences that we encounter in Chopin's works and the various sources are the result of the presence of separate manuscripts sent to different publishers. It's possible that the absence of the staccato marking in measure 108 had simply been forgetfulness on the engraver's part, or we could speculate that Chopin did not notice the absence of the dot while going over the proof sheet. But why are these two measures marked with the staccato in the manuscript and no others? Why don't we find a consistent marking of staccatos in this passage, especially when we do in other works like the Nocturne that we just mentioned earlier? We can assume that Chopin informed Schlesinger about mistakes that should not be reported from the manuscript, the staccato in measure 108 being one of them, perhaps. But what about the staccato in measure 106? Why is it there? It seems rather odd that a stray staccato dot would appear in isolation. It was while studying the autograph that I noticed that every page of the manuscript is somewhat sprinkled with tiny ink specks, droplets that likely flew from Chopin's quill as he notated the Ballade. Several of them occur in positions that could be mistaken for staccato markings, especially when they land directly above or below note heads. In a manuscript with no erasing capability, Chopin had no way to remove such marks. The only solution would have been to alert the publisher not to read them as intentional. Now, I realize this may sound far-fetched, but it's a point that becomes obvious only when we zoom out from the placement of an individual staccato marking. Had the engraver included the staccato in measure 108, Chopin would have deemed it an error and had it removed. Perhaps that's what happened. It's also possible that a discussion with the publisher or the engraver, or perhaps the inclusion of an errata sheet, may have clarified potential misunderstandings. As for the staccato in measure 106, which does appear in all first editions, I believe this may actually be a printed smudge. The manuscript is full of similar blemishes, staff lines sometimes thicken into blots. Similar smudges appear in quite a few measures and bear a striking resemblance to the staccato in measure 106. My hunch is that Chopin didn't consider it necessary to warn the publisher about this one, but the engraver clearly interpreted it as staccato anyway. We know that Chopin implemented further layers of information to the proof sheets because the manuscript is missing crucial interpretive directions, such as the pedal markings in the second theme. So there must have been a further stage of editorial work. It is of course possible that Chopin meant for the staccato dot under the E to be there, but in my opinion it is more likely that he may not have noticed it while revising the proof sheet. What is the moral of the story then? While I can't prove this narrative with absolute certainty, it's a helpful reminder of the need for critical distance when confronting editorial inconsistencies or notational oddities. We often feel compelled to explain every marking to ourselves and our potential listeners, especially when it seems to contradict our musical instincts. But sometimes the most honest answer is, we don't know, or more usefully perhaps, we know enough to doubt. Manuscripts can be revealing, and in this case, what we learn from the manuscript of the Ballade in G minor is that even the most direct sources can be misleading. In these cases, perhaps, the best we can do is press pause and suspend our urge to use only what we know in order to get an answer.